Dogs Don't Tell Jokes by Louis Sachar. 9. Gary crossed the street in front of Floyd Hicks Junior High. He felt like a brand new person. "The new improved goon," he said, then laughed. No, not goon. He didn't want to be called goon anymore. "I don't have to be funny," he said. It was like he was wearing all new clothes. "No, not new clothes," he said. He still looked the same on the outside. "New underwear. It's like I've been wearing the same pair of underpants for 10 years, and now I've finally gotten a new pair." He'd just say normal things and make some normal friends, and he'd get $100 from his parents for not telling a joke, and another 100 when he won the talent show. He tried to figure out what a normal kid would buy with $200, maybe a Nintendo. "Hey, Joe," says Gary, "you want to come over after school and play with my Nintendo?" "Sure, Gary," says Joe Reed. "Hi, Gary, how are you doing?" asks Ryan Utt. "Okay, so Gary," says Matt Hughes, "you got any plans this weekend?" "Not really." "Good, why don't you come over to my house? We're going to Gary's daydream had ended there. He didn't know what normal kids did on weekends. He and Angela liked to play croquet. Ira Feldman was arguing about something with Steve and Michael Higgins. Steve and Michael Higgins were twin brothers. All three were holding baseball cards. Gary joined them. Apparently, Ira was trying to convince one of the Higgins brothers to trade a certain baseball card, while the other Higgins brother was advising against it. Gary nodded his head several times as he listened to them. Ira was in the middle of listing all the accomplishments of somebody named Kirby Puckett when he suddenly turned and asked, "What do you want, goon?" Gary shrugged. "Nothing." Ira returned to his negotiations. "So baseball cards, huh?" Gary asked. "Uh-huh," answered Steve, or maybe Michael. Gary couldn't tell them apart. "Look," Ira said to Michael, or maybe Steve, "if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Personally, I think I'm doing you a favor, but I'm not going to twist your arm." "Some favor," said the other Higgins twin. "What are you talking about?" protested Ira. "The only reason I'm even offering you this deal is I already have 4 Kirby Puckets." Gary laughed. They all looked at him. "What's the matter?" asked Ira. "Don't you think it's fair?" That had nothing to do with it. He just thought Kirby Puckett was a funny name. He thought of a joke about it being foul, not fair, but kept it to himself. It felt good not to tell a joke for once. "What do you think, Goon?" asked Michael. Or maybe Steve. "Should I do it?" Gary shrugged. "You're not going to listen to Goon, are you?" asked Steve, or maybe Michael. "Sure, whatever he says, I'll do the opposite." They all laughed. "What do you think, Goon?" He was saved by the bell. "Well, gotta go," said Gary. "See you later." He tried hanging out with different groups of people during recess and lunch. He even sat and listened to Janice Carr, Vicki Matthews, and Marcia Posey talk about giving each other permanents. Finally, Vicki turned and demanded, "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. He couldn't think of anything to say except a joke. If you really want your permanents to be permanent, you should use concrete instead of hairspray. But he kept it to himself. He might as well have told them a joke, because when he walked away, he heard them all laughing at him. "Hey, Joe!" he shouted as he ran out onto the football field. Joe was talking to Zach, but turned and smiled at Gary. "Hey, what's happening, Goon?" Gary shrugged and smiled. Joe continued his conversation with Zach. "So how about throwing me a pass today?" said Gary. "No one ever guards me." "That's because center's not eligible," said Zach. He and Joe laughed. Joe patted Gary on the back. "You're doing a great job hiking the ball. Keep it up." "Okay, Joe." The game started. After each play, Gary was the first one back in the huddle with Joe. "Good pass, Joe," he said, or "Nice run," or "That would have been a touchdown if he hadn't tipped it." Joe kept having to move around him so he could talk to the other members of the team. "So what are you going to call this time, pass or run?" asked Gary. "How about a triple reverse?" "Back off," said Joe. "I'll call the plays." "Sure, Joe, I understand. I was only trying to help." Joe put his hands in front of him, almost as if he was going to push Gary out of the way. "If you really want to help, the best thing you can do is just keep out of my face, okay?" "Okay, Joe." And that's the end of chapter 9.